Hello. So in this video, we're actually going to look at JavaScript and what JavaScript is all about. Then we'll dive a little bit into how JavaScript coding works and all that. So basically, what's JavaScript? JavaScript is a programming language, right? That was primarily used for front end, but you can actually use it for back end right now. But it was primarily used for front end, client side, and then you can use it for to add interactivity, to your website, right? So all those things we talked about, right? Like the wardrobe to be able to open and all that, they could do with JavaScript. So JavaScript is a language that they can actually use to do that, right? So how does JavaScript works, right? How does it work, right? So let's actually write some JavaScript code. So, but from the previous video, if you can remember, right? So we had a simple website folder. So, but what did I do right now? What I did was I decided to. We didn't have a simple website folder, sorry about that. But I created a simple website folder and I decided to put all my website files in there, right? Yeah, so this is where they are right now. So, but I want to do something now. I want to create a new folder, right? And then I'll just call it, let's say JavaScript calculator. So the reason why I'm calling JavaScript calculator is because we are going to dive into the basics of JavaScript, right? Then after diving into the basics of JavaScript, we're going to develop a very simple JavaScript calculator, right? So to just demonstrate how that works. So JavaScript calculator, and then let's go there and open that folder. So we use the open folder, and then we'll open folder JavaScript calculator. So let's create our index file. So we'll say index.html, right? So this is it. So based on we already know how to write the basics of HTML, I'm just going to use a quick shortcut to get that up and running on my computer. The basic template. So what I did was on a Windows computer, I pressed the Shift key with where you have the exclamation mark, right? So Shift exclamation mark on my keyboard right now, where you have the number 1, that's where the exclamation mark is, and then I press enter and it generated this. So we'll call it. Let's just put JavaScript calculator. So the calculator basically at the end of the whole video, it's basically supposed to be right. It just takes two numbers, number 1, number 2, and it does some basic computing with that, and then gives you the results and all of that. So you input number 1, number 2, and it does all that. But before we go into all of that, we're going to take in the basics of JavaScript. So how does JavaScript work? So there are two ways you can actually write JavaScript, right? You can put it in a script tag and put it on the web page you're working on, or you could actually put it on an external file, and then attach it from all those places. I'm going to take both of them, right? So let's quickly take, let's put it on the web page you want to work on. So we use the script tag, and then we say type, say equal to text slash JavaScript, right? Text slash JavaScript, and then we close it. It's not a self-closing tag, you have to close it, right? So let me put just put the h1 here, right? And then let's just say JavaScript calculator, so that we know that okay, this is what we're working on. And then let's do something. Let us write alert, right? And we say hello. So let's actually go and open this web page on the browser. So I'll just right click here, right now, just copy path, and I'll come here and paste it. So you can see something. You can see the page says hello, right? That's basically JavaScript. So what it's saying is once this page actually loads, like once this index of HTML comes up, it should show this alert, right? So this is a function, but we're going to get into functions in a bit, right? And before we go to functions, I just want to show you that this is JavaScript and it's working live, right? So by the time I actually click OK, you can see that it shows this. So let's quickly continue. So to comment, the way we talked about comments in HTML and CSS. So to put comments, you have single line comments, this, so you can put comments, or you can use this. Let's say if I come here and do this, right? and I put like this, you can see that. So similar to CSS in that regard, right? So those are ways, some of the ways you can put comments on HTML. But I'm just going to comment that out and leave that there for you guys for the time being. So let's write something. So let's put console.log, then we'll put console.log. Let's just say hello world, right? So by the time I hit refresh, you're not seeing anything here. So where is that hello world going to show? If I right click and I click on inspect, right? It's Chrome, I'm currently using Chrome, and we click on console, we can see that here. So this console is a way you can interact, you can get some things from JavaScript, right? It shows you some things, and not just JavaScript. If you have some errors on your website, it could kind of like show you, let's say some files are not loading or something like that, you can see them here. But when you actually write console.log, right, it comes and it displays them here. Actually, that's the console. So you can check this here. Sometimes if you're having JavaScript error, or you feel like some files are not loading, it can kind of like show you all those things here. So this console.log basically just means it should show this to the console, right? So let's get into a little bit deeper. So let's look at variables. So what are variables in programming, right? What are variables in JavaScript? So the way I like to explain variables are basically just containers of data, right? So just like when you buy a soft drink, let's say if you buy Coke, right, plastic bottle of Coke, right? So that bottle, the plastic bottle is the container, and the Coke itself is the drink, right? So it stores Coke, the drink, and then they put a label of Coke on it, right? So that is how you can store that, right? If you cook in the house, right, you could have a container where you put salt, right, and you could have another maybe a basket where you put onions. I'm just giving an example. So that container where you put salt, right, the salt is the value, then the variable is that container, right, that stores that thing. So how do we create variables in JavaScript, right? We use the let keyword, right? You can actually use let variable or const, right? So let is for like, when you use let, you can actually change the value of those variables later on. What do I mean? If I say let name equal to John, right, I can come and say, if I say console.log, right, name, it's going to show the value of name. But let's do something now. Let's just say name now equal to James, and I will put console.log, and we put name. And let's see what that does in the web browser, right? So you can see that the value is changed. Initially the value was John, later on the value became James, right? So this is how you can do that. This is for let. You can equally use variable. So the var keyword is one way you can actually do that. So it does the same thing, right? So but the let variable is, the let keyword is a new way of actually like creating, variables in this in JavaScript. And then you now have the const, right? That's const is more for like constant values that don't really change over time. So when we do this, right, you can see that it still works, right? So but when you use something like const, you want to use const for constant variables, right? So let's say constant pi, and then we say 3.14, right? And then we now say console.log pi, right? And let's get rid of all of this, and you can see this. So it shows that value there, right? So that is that on those ones. So there are different types of variables. There are strings, there are numbers, there are booleans, there are arrays, there are objects, right? And I'm going to take them one by one. So what is a string? When you want to store like write alphabets or something like that, like someone's name, that is a very good example of a string. So in the case of the name I used, right? So I said let name equal to John, right? So this is a string, right? And if I say console.log name, it's going to show John, right? If I do this, you see John, right? So let's do something. Let's create a number, right? And we say age equal to, let's say 25. This is of type number, right? Now this is also of type number, right? This is another type of value. So let's say let's just put let's create a double. Let's just say variable x equal to 25.5. So this is number and is of type integer, and this is number and you can easily say float or double, right? So basically, and by the time I come here and I say console.log age, and I put console.log x, what does it show here? You can see all those things are coming up. So basically, how does variables work? When you want to create a variable, you use the keyword let variable or const to define the type. Then you put the variable name. This is the variable name, right? So you put the variable name here, and there are various conventions for creating variable names, but usually you use something called camel casing. So you can say something like first name, right, to create that, but something like this is not allowed, right? And then you can also have numbers at the end, right? So we'll just stick to those for the sake of this course. So we have the variable, and then what is this? This is how you actually assign a value to a variable, and this here is the value, and it's storing a string because it has this, it's covered in double quotes. This is how it is, right? So let's say you have a container, an empty container in your house, and you want to store salt in it. So that container, right? So you could say the container will be called salt container, and that is all of this, right? And what do you want it to store? You want it to store salt. So the value of what is inside is salt, right? But the container itself is this, right? And then this is what you use to assign that value to the variable. So that is how that works. Okay. So how do you create a boolean? Let is student equal to true, right? So what is boolean? Boolean is a type of value in programming that is either true or false. So that's how booleans work, right? So it's either true or false. When I say console.log, right, is student, and I refresh, you can see true, and I could equally set this to false, and I would say this, right, and you can see false. So that is how variables work that's how variables work, booleans work in JavaScript, right? Okay, so back to the initial example I gave, right? So we could, if you're a chef or you like to cook, right, you could have a basket or a container where you keep like onions, right? So all the data in all the items in that basket will be onions, right? So that's like a basket of onions. So that is how arrays work in programming in JavaScript. So when you have an array, it's like you have a group of data together in one container, which is the variable, right? So that's how arrays work. So how do you create an array in JavaScript? So let's say fruits. Let's create an array of fruits. And we say fruits, you put the equal to, and then you put these like square brackets. Let's say apple, right? Apple, banana, then orange, right? So this is an array. So when we say console.log, right? console.log, and we say fruits, what is going to happen? So you can see that it's showing the variables, right? This is showing the variables. These are the values, and you can see something 0, 1, 2, right? 0 representing apple, 1 representing banana, 2 representing orange. So basically that's how arrays are, right? So when it comes to arrays, the first element in the array, right, the first item in the array, the first element has an index of 0, right? The second one has an index of 1, the next one has an index of 2, but the total number of items in the array are actually 3, right? So if we do this dot length, you will see that it will show 3. You can see that it's showing 3. That's the total number of items in the array. But if we want to get the first index and we say 0, what is going to happen? You see, it's bringing out apple, right? So that's how it's doing that, right? So that is that. on arrays basically, right? The very basic level of understanding of arrays. So let's look at objects, right? So objects is another type of data, right, that allows you to store um, store things in the form of key value pair. What do I mean by key value pair, right? So look at this. Let's say let person equals, and it's created using the angular brackets, so, like the curly brackets, sorry. So and then we say first name, and we say John, right? And you have put a comma at the end there, and we say last name, and we say do, right? Last name do. So now by the time we put console.log, what do we have? Person. What happens? By the time we console.log that, you can see that it's saying that the first name is John, the value is John, the last name is do. So by the time I come and click, if I come here, right, and I say, hey, I want the first name of the person, look at this, it's going to produce just John. If I change it to last name, it's going to produce do. So basically that's how objects work. That's just basically a very basic level understanding of objects, right? So let's look at arithmetic operators. Arithmetic operators, right, that we can use to perform operations on variables. Let's say for instance we want to add two numbers, right? So we can say, let's say sum, right, equal to, let's just say age. The age is coming from here, right? So we can, and then we say x, which the x is coming from here. And by the time we see console.log sum, what eventually happens, you can see it has added those two variables, right? So that is how you can actually add numbers, right? So if let's just copy all of this, right? So I'm going to do the same thing for subtraction, multiplication and division. But before I do that, just make some amends. Let me put this as 5, right? Or no, let's leave that, and then I'll create a new variable, right? I'll create a new variable down here. So let's say let y equal to 5. So I want to use y in this case, right? So let's say let diff will stand for the difference, the age minus y, right? And then we say console.log, right, diff, and then let us say, let's copy this. We paste for multiplication, we paste for division. The reason why I'm having this red is because we have duplicate variable names, so we have to change the variable names, right? So this will be for multiplication, and then this will be for, let's say division, right? So we use a symbol for division, right? And then we change all this from div. Here we're going to change this to more, and then we have here div, right? And then when we do that, you notice this, right? So this is the sum, this is the subtraction, that is 25 minus 5. This is the multiplication, 25 times 5, and this is the division, and that's what we have here, right? So that is basically that, and we can actually do something like that on strings. So let's say let first name equal to John, and we say let last name equal to, oh wait, we have our person variable here. So let's just do something, right? Instead of doing this, let's just say let full name be equal to, right? Let's say full name equal to person dot first name, right, plus, let's put this, and then we'll put a plus person dot last name. So let's actually console.log it first. Console.log, and we say full name. So what am I doing? I'm actually using the plus for strings, right? We can actually use plus for strings, but it concatenates it in this case. So it's going to merge the two strings together as one. The reason why I put this empty space here is because I don't want the two names, I want it to be separated. If I don't put it, it's going to be together. How? Let's look at this first. So you can see John Doe is the full name, but by the time I take this all out and I leave just one plus, right? Let's look at what happens and I refresh. So you can see how it looks, right? So that is how that's how it works. So that's what I actually included that there, and then I refreshed so that we can see all of that, right? So basically that's how string concatenation works. Okay, so let's look at something that is very let's look at one last thing, right? So we can have comparison operators, right? So there's something called comparison operators, right? So let's look at something. Let's say is equal, right? Equal to 5 equal to 5, right? I need to say false because 5 is not equal to 5, right? So it's going to check, is 5 equal to 5? If 5, and the reason why it's showing this false like this is because it's not just looking at the values, it's looking at the data type, right? So if we when you use this tree, it's going to look at the data types, right, to check, to ensure that they are of the same data type and if they're equal to each other, right? So you can see this to show false, but by the time I do, let's look at another example now. We say let is not equal, right, equal to 5, and we put this and we say 5. So this will be true. How? Is 5 equal to 5? In JavaScript, 5 is literally not the same thing as 5. So 1 is treated as a string and 1 is treated as a number. You understand? Basically, on a very basic level. Like, the purpose of this entire course is to keep things as simple as possible and to stick to the very basics as much as possible. So it's give a proper introduction to understanding how front-end development is all about. So now let us actually look at what's going to happen. So we'll say console.log, right, is equal, I will say console.log is not equal. Let's see what happens. So you can see 1 is false and 1 is actually true, right? So this means negation, right? If it's not equal to, so this checks if it's not equal to 5, then it makes it true. But if it's equal to 5, if it's not true, then it makes it false, right? So basically that's how those two things work. And these three signs literally check for the data type too, right? So it checks, it makes a bit more in-depth check than the regular type, right? So there's also this, but this makes more in-depth check, right? So that is that on that. So let's quickly look at conditional statements. So in a practical application development, so there are times where you want to run a certain condition only if something is true, right? Only if something successfully ran. So how do we do that? Or let's say, for instance, as you are, maybe there are times where you don't need the phone, you don't want someone to call you. So if you maybe, this is a practical example, if somebody calls you on the phone, right, or maybe there's a particular person you don't want to talk to at the moment, so if your phone rings, you check if the person that called you is a particular person. Maybe that person you don't want to pick, then you don't pick up the phone, right? That's how the if conditional statement works, right? So if it's not that person you don't want, you don't pick up the phone. But if it's that person, you can pick up the phone. You can decide, if it's not that person, you can still decide to do nothing. So let's create a practical example of it, right? So let's say we have a person here, right? And then let's just look at this, right? So, but let's create a new variable. Let's say person name, just do this, equal to John, right? And then this is how it works. If, then you put the condition person name. So in this case, we can look at this, right? We can see this example here. If person name is equal to, right, is equal to John, then what should you do? Should just say console.log, should say console.log welcome, right? So see, it's showing welcome, right? And then if we put if we change the name to James, right, observe, it's going to do nothing. But what if the person is not James, you know? Or let's change this to pickups, right? Let's just say pick, do not pick. So we don't want to pick John's call. So if the person's name is John, we're going to have do not pick. But if the person's name is James, right, then let's assume you actually want to do something once the person is not John, and that's where you have the else statement, right? So we'll say else, right? And we'll say else, we would say console dot log, I'll say it's fine to pick. Alright, so now look, once it's James, it's fine to pick, but once we change it back to John, what's going to happen? Do not pick. So basically that's just it for, you know, if and else statements. So we're going to look at loops, right? Let's look at loops in JavaScript. So we're going to look at two loops. Basically, we're going to look at the while loop, and we're going to look at the for loop, right? So what is a loop? A loop is a code you want to run repeatedly. Like unlike the if statement where or else, once it has run it, it has run it. Let's say there's a particular code you want to constantly run provided that something is true, right? It's still true. Like you have an app that as long as you have you're connected to the internet, if somebody sends a message, right, then the person should be able to receive the message. You understand? On paper. So that's how it works. So as long as they're connected to the internet, the only time someone should not receive a message sent to him or her is if the person is not connected to the internet. That is what I mean on paper, is if the person is not blocked, right? So let's look at the while loop. So this is the while loop, right? You have while, you know, and you have the condition in brackets, and then do something, right? That's how the while loop works. So in this case, let's create a new variable. Let's say let k equal to 0, and then we say while k is lesser than 5, right? K console.log k is, and then we put k, right? And then let's do something. We write k plus plus. What does this mean? This is the same thing as saying k is equal to k plus 1. What does this mean, right? So what it's basically saying is take the value of k you had before, add 1 to it, and store it as a new value of k. So each time this loop is running, right, first time k is 0, the next time you run, k becomes 1, k becomes 2, k becomes 3, then k becomes 4, and then once k is 5, it checks, is k lesser than 5? No, 5 is not lesser than 5, they're the same thing, so it's going to terminate this entire code. By the time we come here, you can look at this, right? So you can see that it's running that and it's showing over there, right? Fine. So it's run 5 times, right? All right. So let us that is basically what the while loop is all about. Now let's look at the for loop, right? When we have for, these are the for loop works, right? So it's similar to the while loop, but this is the difference, right? So we can say for, right? Would say for let z equal to 0, the variable name. Now the condition, while z is lesser than 5, right? And we say z plus plus, and then we say let's copy this, right? And then we paste here, and then we say z is z. When we refresh, you can see that z what it is. So you can see that the similarities. What this is here, right, is this for the for loop, right? When we have this here, then is this for this, and then when we have this here, this is it here, right? So that is how that works. So we can actually use it to loop through. We can use both while and for to loop through array, right? So let's just say L equal to 0 while L is lesser than, right, fruit dot length. So we're trying to loop through the array to get the variables, and then we say L plus plus. So in this case now, we'll just quickly, let's just say fruits L, right? And when we do that, what actually happens? So you can see that it loops through apple, banana, and orange, and it shows them all there, right? So that's how basically the loop works for array, right? That's how basically the loop works for arrays in JavaScript for the while loop. You understand? So, and then while loop and the for loop, right, for JavaScript, right? So basically that's how it works. So concerning this, right, so remember I actually said that this checks the data type, right? So this is what is going to happen if we don't actually put these trace and we put 2, right? Now what is going to happen is equal to, right? Now look, when I refresh it, right, this is the is equal to, and when I refresh it, you see that is equal to is now true, and that is because it didn't check the data type. 5 is technically 5, but when you put this, it's actually going to check data type if possible. But when we do that now, you'll see that it changes it to false. That's how that works, right? So let's look at functions. And then we look at functions. So this value here, the reason why we put this here is because each time is incrementing, right? So it's just like when we specify that we want to get the first one here, right? So we put 0 to get the first index. So when we put this here, it's going to loop through the number of items in the array, and it's going to be putting the index here because the first index is 0 and all of that. So what are functions, right? So functions basically in JavaScript let's say, okay, in real life, right, they're like block of codes that can be run, right? So let's say as let's assume you have younger ones and you want to send them on an errand, right? For instance, so you tell them go buy me bread. So what do they expect, right? So let's assume whenever you've given them the instruction before that, whenever I tell you to go buy me bread, this is what I want you to buy, this is the kind of bread I want you to buy, and then you not tell them this is the amount. So they know. So when you tell them go buy me bread, you give them the bread, right? You give them the amount for the bread, the price, give them the amount, and then you give them, they go buy the bread, and then they either come back with the bread or come back with the money and tell you that the bread is not available or something like that. So, but they already know it in their head. It's not something that you constantly have to tell them. It's already there when you're giving them the instruction that, okay, whenever I want you to do this particular thing, this is what I want you to do. But you will not see them going to buy bread for you, only when you tell them to go buy the bread. So that's how functions are. Something similar like that in JavaScript, right? How do you create a function? Here's the keyword function greets, right? Let's create a function that greets somebody, and we say function greets, right? So you use the keyword function, and then this will be the name, the function name, right? So personally, I'd advise you that function names start with small letter, right? But you can use camel casing, right, to create function names. That's for the sake of this tutorial. We're going to keep it really simple. Small letter and camel casing, right, to create function names. So you could have something like this. greet person if you want to separate, right? So let's just keep it very simple. And then in this case, let's just say alert, right? Greeting, right? But by the time I refresh the browser, you notice that you don't see anything. So the instruction is there, but it's not running it because we didn't tell it to execute it. But by the time I come down here and I do this, right? What happens? You can see greeting, right? So basically, a function is the block of code that you can call to run anytime you want to run it. So as you have this here, what this means is that you wrote the instruction here, but you didn't execute it. When you executed it was when you did this. So if I remove this, it no longer runs. If I refresh the browser, you can see that it does nothing, right? So how about if I want a function that does something, how do I do that? Let's assume for this greet, I want to be able to pass a name here, right? I want to be able to pass a name. So if I just specify this, right? Once I supply that, they call them arguments, right? Parameters, right? What the function is expecting to receive, right? So basically that's how they work. So once I put that there, I can call this, I can say hello, greetings, and then I would say plus name, right? So then I have to supply the name here. Whatever I supply here, see John as a string, you can see that. So when I refresh this, you can see greetings John. So if I come back here and I change this to James, right? And you would see greetings James, right? So that's basically how you can pass in things like that into a function and then it will run something like that, right? That's how you can do that. So what if I actually have a function that returns, let's say I want you to return something, an integer, right? So let's say function add, right? Now we're going to supply the integers. We say a, b. So what does that mean? This function is expecting two variables, right? Variable a and variable b, and it must be supplied. And I will use the return statement, return a plus b, right? Return a plus b. So when I come down here, if I want to run this and I say add, right? I'll say let's create a variable to store the value of that person. Let's say new sum equals to add, then we supply 5 and 4, right? And then we say console.log, and then we say new sum. What then happens when we look at this? You can see now, right? So it's returning that value. That value is returning that and is storing it into the value of new sum, right? So basically that is how that actually works, right? It's taking that value and is storing it into this value of new sum. So that is that on array, right? Just the very basics of arrays in JavaScript. On functions, right? We're keeping it real basic and real simple. So that's how that works there. So let's look at let's get into something a little bit more interesting, right? We're going to get into the interesting parts. So let's assume we're going to explain something now, events handling. So when you come to a website and you see a button and you click on the button, let's say the button is expected to do something, maybe alert you or try and create an account or something like that. That's what we call events, right? So events are things that let's say a way the website can respond to users' actions, something like that, right? So when the user does something, you can respond to it and give a feedback or something like that. Like when you click a button. So let's quickly do something like that. Let's quickly create a button on this page, right? So let's just say, and this is how you create a button. So you use the button, right? And then you specify the button tag and you specify the type. Unless this time we want to use the button type, right? Because it's the button we're trying to use. There is also submit, which is for submitting a form, so to say, but we're trying to use a button type button, right? So when we create that, and let's give it an ID, right? And when we say the ID, let's just say btn I say click me btn, right? And then let's just say click me. So when you come to the website, right, you can see all of this, right? So but when you click it, it does nothing. So let's assume we want it to actually do something when you click on it, right? That's where adding event handling comes in. So we're going to add an event handler to that button, right? So let's say let button equal to document dot get element by id, and then we'll supply the id of the button, which in this case is this, right? I'm going to supply it here and we'll put it here. So okay, so let me quickly explain this. Document is like I like to explain things using the very basic ways I could do it. So documents, right, is the web page, right? So the DOM, the document, right, the web page, and then you get elements by ID. Well, now we're trying to access an element that has an ID of what? Click me btn, which is this one here, right? Which is this up here. So how does that work? You know, when in CSS, if you want to select something by ID, you put the hashtag and then you type the ID name. So this is how you do it in JavaScript, right? You can do that using ID, right? If you want to get by the class name, right? If you want to get by the class name, right, you would use document dot get element by element by class. Element by class name, sorry about that. So I was trying to remember all of that. So document dot get element by class name, right? And then you supply the name of the class, right? If you're going to get it by the tag, right? So it will be by tag name, and you supply the tag, say a div, for instance. So that's how it can do that. So this is like an equivalent of saying dot then in CSS, and this is like equivalent of just getting the tag name, something like that. So in CSS, so let us continue. So when you click this button, we want that button to do something when we click on it, right? And what's the button going to do? So we say we want it to perform something. So we say button dot add event listener. So the add event listener is a function that we can actually use to add an event listener. Like if you click on a button, say click, right, and you want it to do something. So it's going to take two things. It's going to take, right? Basically, it's going to take the name of the event you want, and then it's going to take a function that runs once that event is triggered. So we're going to create a function, and then we do this like this. We have to put this here, right? So please, as a good programming practice, because you could go into another programming language and you have to specifically put a semicolon at the end, but it's not really required in JavaScript. But as a good programming practice, please always put semicolon at the end of any statement you make, right? So, and then what do we say? I want it to just do you clicked me. So what happens when we click that button, right? This click me button is going to show you clicked me. Now watch. You can see that, right? So that's event handling in JavaScript, right? So when somebody clicks on that button, it's going to show you clicked me, right? So now we're going to look at two things before we actually continue to the calculator, right? And this is just something that you should do, right? So we're going to look at Ajax and then fetch, right? So this is how Ajax and fetch works. So let's assume you want to fetch information from the internet, like you want to pull a product, like you want to pull information from a URL. How? Let's look at something. Let me quickly go to a URL. Right. So if I go to a URL and I see the dummy, let's just, alright, I have one, right? Dummy JSON. This one can work, right? So let's click on it, right? And then let me come back here and I click on products, right? So you can see it already has like some code that can be actually be used to do that. So when you do this, if you copy this link, what I'm trying to do is this is like they're trying to fetch information on this particular product. So if we come to this link and we paste it, sorry about that. If we remove this, you can see that it's bringing up some JSON data, right, about the particular product, right? So if we go to beautify JSON and we put this here, right? So you can see, so it just like some fake data that has been populated already online. So in case you maybe in a situation where you're building an application and you want to be able to pull things from the internet, right, and into your own application using JavaScript, so that's one way you can actually do it. So we'll quickly look at how that actually works, right? So let's quickly do that. So when we click on this, instead of doing this anymore, right, I want you to do something, right? Let it fetch the information on that particular data, and then we can work with it, right? So while we're fetching the information, we use the fetch, right, and we supply the link, right? So in this case, I'll just copy this link, right? I'll supply it there, right? And then we then, right? So what this then stands for basically, let me response, so that I'll explain it. And then we have response dot JSON, right? And then we do this. So basically what this first line means is fetch, hey, I want you to go fetch this URL for me, right? I want you to go get it. And then when you retrieve it, right, I want you to check, was there a response? Yes, if there was a response, whatever I got as the response, I want you to actually convert it, to JSON, right? So it's literally, that's what this is basically just saying, right? JSON stands for JavaScript object notation, right? And then when you see all this data from the internet, when you see this, it comes as JavaScript object notation, right? That's literally what it's about. So it's, the way we have an object, this is an object here, right? But when information comes from the internet, when it comes like that, it comes as JavaScript object notation. If you notice the difference, like when we have first name here, that's how we can have this here, right? That was how we can have this here. But you notice that it has like, it's put in double quotes, right? So that's the difference between JavaScript object and JavaScript object notation. But we have to convert it to JavaScript object so that we can work with that. So that's what this first line does there. That is to convert it, saying that it's in JSON, right? And then we have then. So this is where we're actually going to convert, right? So we put this. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to store, right, the data that was gotten, right? I'm trying to store it in that variable, right? In that value there. So this is that. I'm saying, hey, whatever data that comes from this, I want it stored in data, right? That value here, I want it stored in data. Then we can actually use that data here, right? Then we have to catch if there was an error, say something happened and it didn't work, right? So we say error, and then we say console dot error, right? And we say error. Good. So what's with all these balls, these arrow, they call them arrow function. What is all that? So it's particularly useful when you have just one value, right? Let's say you're returning just one value. In this case now, we could have easily written this as this. So you see this particular function here, this add function. I just call it add2. I would say a, b. We could have easily done it like this, and it would still work. Why? Done a plus b. So about that. Arrow functions, JavaScript. Let me just get that. I'm trying to remember that. Arrow functions, JavaScript. I'm just trying to recall that particular feature and how that works, right? So, my bad, right? So basically, this is how arrow functions work. So we have to specify this, and then we put this here, right? And then when we put that here, then we put that, right? And then we specify this, and then we remove this. So basically, arrow functions in JavaScript, right? How do they work? You can see in this case here, right? We have the function, we let keywords there, right? So let my function this, right? Add 2 equal to this. Let me just copy this, and then we paste it there, right? So function, let's get rid of this. Sorry about that. So basically, if I wanted to have that same feature there, right, this is how I'll do it, right? So I could say let's add 2 equal to this. And what is that, right? So this becomes an arrow function. We don't need the function keyword there. So this is basically the same thing as saying this, because we only have one return statement here, right? That's why we have this. So when you specify this, if you have just one return, if it's returning just one thing as a function, you can use this. So you let the name of the function and equal to, then if it has, right, if it takes certain parameters and arguments, whatever, you actually put this here in bracket, and you pass this arrow, and then you can do what you want with what is this. So this is the same thing as saying return this plus this, and basically do the same thing. So that's what all of this is all about, right? When you see this arrow function, so that you understand what it's about. So let's go. But in this case, right, let's do something. Okay, let's just do that. So in this case, when we come back to this website and we refresh, and we hit this, so you can see, right, it brought out a bunch of things, right? So that is the whole product software and every other thing. This is the product details. But we can't work with this yet, because we need to convert it to JavaScript objects, right? So let's do that. And how do we do that? So we can do this, or we can say so let's just do this, and let's create a function, right? We have this here, expected command. Sorry about that. So arrow functions, and then when we have this console.log, initially we had console.log. So but let's do something. Let's just convert it to JSON here, right? And then converting it to JSON, we would say let's create a variable here. Let's say let data, converted data, right? Let's just be empty out of the time being. So here we would say let it return, right? Let it return, let's do converted data, then will be equal to, right? Converted data would now become equal to, right, JSON dot pass, and then we would say data. So it's going to convert whatever was gotten here, right, into data that we can actually work with. And if you look now, right, let's do something. When we say console, right, let's say console.log, right, and then we say converted data, watch what happens. So when you click this, right, object, this is not valid JSON, invalid JSON, error, converted data, pass data, pass anonymous. All right. Okay. Okay. Let's look at all of this. So if we put console.log, let's put console.log data, right? And then that stores that. So let's say converted data now. Converted data is equal to JSON dot parse, right, data, and let's see how that goes. Data is not defined, right? But you got this, right? Basically, yes, data is not defined. So let's see, data console.log data, right? This. All right. And then copy this. So data. All right. Let's complain of this. Expected. Yeah, because it's supposed to be an arrow function. Basically, that's what it's complaining about, right? So let's say, okay, so let's say data, let's say converted data, let's say all right, so this there, data, so we have the data here, so you will say console.log. You can see all of that there, right? So you can see the data, right, that we're working with. So when we pass this, you can see when we click this, we have the data, right? So, but if we put JSON.parse data, let's see. So when we do this, object is not a valid JSON, all right? JSON.parse. Just give me a minute. Let me get this thing. JSON parse JavaScript. All right. So JSON.parse. Fetch JavaScript. Just get that. Let me be sure. Just want to be sure of that. Fetch, no, not this. Fetch JavaScript. Fetch JavaScript. JSON parse. JSON. Just want to confirm that thing. Response this, then function reference this. All right. Then function response. Yeah, that was the reason why I was having that skip my mind. So is an arrow function, and then we have data, right? And then we can do this, right? So it's an arrow function and we have data, and we can say converted data equals JSON.parse, and then when we do that JSON.parse, we can now pass in that data there. So what then happens, right? So when we come here and we say console.log, and then we put console.log, and then we put converted data, and then we save this. Let's come back and refresh, and then we see what we have, right? So it's saying converted data is not defined. Sorry, it's supposed to be inside the button. So when we do that and we click on this JSON.parse, JSON.parse data, just 1 second. Use JSON, return response as JSON, function JSON, use it JSON, get, then function return response.json, and then function JSON, then function JSON, use JSON data. All right. All right, so let's look at this. JSON data.id. Let's look at this first. Then refresh. We have to pass this thing, right? So just trying to get the right thing there. So let me pause the video. Yeah, so the thing is, I actually take a lot of programming languages from front end to back end to that and a whole lot of things. So sometimes it gets like kind of confusing, all that stuff. So the thing is actually already this this function here already makes it to be in JSON format, right? So I was kind of mixing it up with Ajax XML. That was what was actually happening, right? So with this, right, let us come back to that. Once we have this, we have data, right? So it already converts it to JSON. So by the time we click on this, you can see now you have this here, right? And we can actually work with it. So if we say .id, right, we click on it and then we click this, right? You can see that it's showing there. So that's what we actually have there. So that's how this thing actually works. So that's how you can access that using that. So let's go to XML quickly. Let's look at XML. When we look at XML, what is XML? XML is another way. Ajax XML is another way that we can actually access data from the internet. You can use fetch, you can use Ajax XML, right? How does it work? So this same thing particularly, if I wanted to use, let's have a second button on the page, right? And then let's just duplicate this. Click me to, right? And then let's put this like this. Once we have this, I'll just copy this, right, for the second button. Then I'll paste it. So I'll say button 2, and here I'll say click me to. And then when we click on that button 2, what do we actually want it to do, right? So we'll be getting rid of this converted var data because we don't really need it anymore, right? And then that goes to, so we've got this here. So how do we do that? If we want to use XML, what do? We do let xhr, which is the variable name, equal to new XML, right? And when we have XML, where HTTP, I say request, right? And then so we'll say xhr.open, right, to get, and we'll say we want to get request. So we want to get request, we say https domain json.com, that entire link. Let me just copy it, right? Just copy all of this. If I copy all of this and I just replace it with this, right? And then once we've done that, we would say true, right? So when we do that, that's for the first time, and then we'll say xhr dot send, right? And when we do send, what does it mean? It means execute it and send that. So this is first, so we have to create a new XML HTTP request. Then we decide, we tell you that it's a get request that we want. We supply the link and we set this to true. And then when we say send, we're saying execute that particular thing, right? Execute it. And then we're going to check, right, if the XHR, right, already state change. So basically what this means is if its state has changed, like it was able to successfully pull the information from the internet, it's going to run a function, and then when it runs that function, if we now check the xhr state dot ready, right, state, and we say equal to 4, that is to check if the state is actually ready, and the xhr status, right, xhr status is 200, means everything ran successfully, right? So we'll say console.log, right? And we'll say xhr.response text, right? So let us do this, and you will see why I actually had that initial like confusion, because like I work with several programming languages. So when we click this, right, look at it, click me button 2, let's see what happens here. ID, click me button 2, and then yeah, so ID, so let's look at it. So you can see it's run, right? So when I click on this, you can see pull it out. I was wondering what's going on. So but if you try to work with this now, unlike the other one, because this already converts to JSON, and that's why I had that issue. If we try to work with this now, right, let's say we try to do .id, it's going to bring an error, right? So by the time we refresh this and we do this, you can see that it's not going to do anything, right? But because we need to convert this to JSON, and that's why I had that initial little issue, right? Because like I actually work with various programming languages, so this actually converts it to JSON, which we can actually use to work with this when it comes to fetch. But when you use this, you actually need to convert it to JSON, right? So we'll have to convert this first. So we'll say let data equal to xhr dot response text, right? Text, right? And then we're going to say JSON dot pass, right? And then we do this, and when we do that, we say data dot id, and let's watch what happens. We can select that particular, so you can see that we can get 1, right? I believe if we look at data and we do this, right, and we click on this, we can see the data. So let's change this to title. If I say data dot title, right, data dot title, and I do this, you can see it's giving me the title of it, right? So that's basically that for it. So let's quickly look at let's quickly work on the calculator we talked about initially, right? So how is the calculator going to work now? So for the calculator, I'm just going to comment all of this because we won't be needing that, right? I'm just going to comment it out. So for the calculator app, we're going to need a form to be able to get what the user imputed, right? So we need a form. How do we get this form? I have to create the form. So we let me just comment this out, right? So how do you create a form in HTML? And I'm going to use an external JavaScript files to do this particular one in this case, right? So let's say, how do we create the form? We'll do form, right? And then that's how you create a form. And a label, if we do this, right, I will say number 1, right? Then we create an input. We say input type. We're trying to create an input and we're wanting a type of text, right? And then we say ID is equal to number 1. So what am I essentially doing, right? I'm creating an input of type text, and by the time I refresh this page, you can see we have this, right? So let's duplicate this. So there are different types of inputs. There is email, right? You can have email here, you can have different types too. This is the idea of it. So let's copy this and let's paste, and let's call this 2 for number 2, right? And we put here number 2. So when we come here and refresh, right, we can see this, but I want it to go to the next line. So I could easily put it in a div, but I want to use something called BR. It's called line break. When I put that, you can see it's going to the next line, right? So that's to put it in the next line, right? So I'll do the same thing again, but I'm going to copy this button code right here because I want a button. And then in that button, what are we going to have? We're going to have add, right? So we'll say, let's just say add btn, right? And when you do that, you can see that, right? So I will also copy the same code for subtract, multiply, and divide. Add, sub, But let me use the plus symbol. Let me use the subtract symbol. Let me just put an X, and let's just put a this, right? So we change this to divide. We change here to multiply. We change here to subtract. And when we do that, you can see all these buttons, they're there, right? But they don't do anything because for now they don't do anything. And then we're going to create an extra div. Let's create a div here. Let's put a line break, and we'll create a div. Or let's just move this. Let's just create a div here, and then we give it an ID of result, right? And then we give it an ID of result. So this is where we're going to store the results, right? When the result comes up, we're going to store it in that place. So literally it's empty for now. Just going to remain that way. So how do we create an external JavaScript file? So let's first create a folder, and I call it JS. So I recommend you putting your JavaScript files in a particular folder. And then let's put new file. We say calculator.js. So in this place we can write all our JavaScript. So how do we actually link that file? So we use the script tab. I will say source equal to JS, the folder /calculator/JavaScript, right? And we do that. That's how we link it. If we click on it, it takes us here. So to save time, since you already understand some of these things, right? Let's just pick up the code, right, from all of these. So I'm just going to pick up this button code, right? I'll pick up this button code and put it here. So what am I essentially saying? I'm saying that, okay, right, let's say add button, right? Let's first do the logic for add. So we change it to add btn, add btn. And when you click on the add btn, what is it supposed to do? It's supposed to add the numbers, right? So first it has to get the numbers that have been imputed. So we're going to say let number one in let's say input 1 equal to, and then I'm going to copy all of these and I'll paste it here to save time, and I would say here, I would say number 1, right? So this is the number 1 input and this is number 2 input, right? So I'm getting the element ID number 1 and number 2. That is what the people actually inserted here, number 1 here and then number 2. So what's the next thing, right? There are some checks we want to do. Let's first check if the person supplied. I want to first do something. I want to confirm that the person actually supplied something and didn't just submit an empty didn't just submit nothing, right? So how do we do that? First things first, we're going to use the if condition to check if something was actually supplied, right? So how are we going to do that? This is how we would first do it, right? So we'd say if input 1, right, input 1 dot value, right, if input 1 dot value, right, and then we're going to do something called trim to ensure that it's not just spaces, right, that the person imputed, the person actually tried to type in, like it wasn't just white space, right? So we're going to use trim input 1 dot value is to get the value of that variable, and we'll say trim, right, or let's just keep it real simple, right? If input 1 dot value is not but let's say if input 1 dot value is equal to, right, if the person supplied an empty string, if we put trim, what that means, let's put trim. So even if the person supplied something like this, right, in the form, it's going to actually just equate it to something like this. So if it's equal to that, we're going to say an alert, right? So we'll say please enter number 1, right? 1. But let's look at something. We want to check not just number 1, we want to check 2 of them at the same time. So if the person supplies number 1, if the person did not supply number 1, or the person did not supply input 2 dot value. So if either input 1 dot, if either input 1 is empty or input 2 is empty, right, it's going to say please enter the two numbers, right? So let's first look at this. If we come here and we hit refresh, button is not defined, calculator.js. Okay, so here's supposed to be add button, right? Okay, good. So now if we refresh this, when we click on this, you can see please enter the two numbers because it didn't supply it, right? So you have to supply the two numbers. So let's actually come back to the code, right? This is the code you have. So what if the person now supplied the two numbers, right? If not just one. In this case, because when I use this or operand here, they call it or, even if I supply one, it's still going to complain, right? Look at this. If this trim, equals this, right? So what this means is, let's refresh. If you supply one, it's still going to complain, right? So you must supply the two numbers. So that's what this thing basically means. Now, if enter the two numbers, that is, if you have not supplied the two numbers, it should that. But if you supply the two numbers, then it should now do the computation, right? And how is that going to be done now? We're going to check, right? We have to, before we start doing the computation, we want to check to ensure that the person actually supplied numbers and not just text, right? So let us check. Now we say if we have a function that we can use, right? So we can use the pass float, right, to check if the person actually supplied, with something called is nan, right? So we say is nan, right, and then we say pass float, and we say the values now. So what are the values? If input 1, right, so this pass float is going to convert it from string, because when you enter something on the form, it comes as string, from string to number, right? So it's going to check it. But if you enter a text, it's going to produce false. That's what basically this does. Pass float is going to try to convert what you entered from string to number. So if you entered 5, it's going to convert this 5 from this to this. So that's what it's basically saying, right? So if it turns out that what you supplied is not a number, right? If what you supplied is not a number, not just for number 1, or that is, if what you supplied for number 1 is not a number, or what you supplied for number 2 is not a number, right? It should show an error. Alert say please enter only numbers, right? But if what you supplied are actual letters, numbers, not letters, right, then we should do something. Let us look at something. Let's do something. It's going to add those two values, right? So we'll say let num1 equal to, or let's just go straight. Let sum equal to pass float. We're going to convert that entered value, right? We're going to convert it to what? To numbers that we can work with, right? Then plus the second value, which is this, right? So both number 1 and number 2 is going to enter it as that. Then now, this particular result tip is supposed to show the results, right? This is particularly supposed to show the results right here, right? This. So we want this thing to show the result. How do we do that? So now we say, right, let the result div equal to document.get element by id, and we'll say result div, right? So when we do that, we now say when we do that, then we want that particular thing to show that result, right? We want that particular thing to show that result. How do we do that? So we can now say result div dot inner HTML. So we're going to clear, if there was any message before there, we're going to clear it, and then we're going to set the inner HTML, right? To put we can use inner HTML to write HTML inside, another tag, right? So we'll say the result is then plus, right? Would say sum, right? So let's give it a shot and let's see what happens. So by the time you do this, shows this, you will enter 1 and you enter 2 here, inner HTML, inner HTML, canary properties of no inner HTML, results div, get element by ID, results div, right? So let's try that again. So we'll put 1 here and we put 2 here. It's not a function. That inner HTML is not a function. Let me get this inner HTML JavaScript. So let me just quickly get that. Get element by ID dot inner HTML, get element by ID result div, get element by ID I have finished, inner HTML result div, alright, so let's just copy this and then paste it here, right? And then let's copy this, let's copy this. So let's remove all of these first, and let's see. Let's copy this and then paste it here, and then let's see how that goes. Fine. So still complaining of that. So let's see, get element by ID, get dot inner HTML, get element by ID dot inner HTML, result div, result div, result div, result div, ID equal to result div, ID, get elements by ID inner HTML, the result is result div, not a function, calculator.js, let's see, inner HTML, seconds, just looking at this, I'm trying to figure out where that is coming from. Alright, so alright, so trying to figure out, okay, so let's result div equal to document to get element by ID result div, and then let's console.log result div. Alright, do this, enter 1, 2. Alright, and it's showing that there. That is what it's showing right there. So he's getting that. And then let's say inner.inner HTML, and then when we do this, 1, 2, right, showing nothing there. And then so we can get that. Oh my. So basically the reason why I was doing that is because when we do results div.inner HTML, we say equal to, then we can now set it to what we want, right? So we're first going to refresh it, making it sure that it's empty, and then when we do this, right, and then we can now set this to the result, right? So we say the result is, we'll come here, we say the result is plus sum, right? Then we can get rid of all of this, and then we can get rid of all of this. My bad, because it's actually written here, right? Look at it. I was putting the bracket, it's not a function. So by the time we do this 1, 2, you can see the result is 3, right? So it's showing the result there, right? So that's how you can actually do that. So if you want to replicate the same thing for the, basically what this is saying is, this is checking, right? This, right, convert what was imputed into numbers, and then when you this pass float converts it to numbers, and this string is removing any white space, right? Then whatever we get, right, sum it and store it as the sum. Then the result, we now get the result div, this result div, right? We get that, and this is it. So the inner.html is what we have written in between this place here. So by the time we actually load the page, if I write this like this and say if I put 1, 2, it's going to clear it out and turn into this. So that's exactly what we're trying to say. We're trying to say whatever was actually in between the opening and closing tag, we want it taken out. That's why we have this line, and then we want the new stuff to be this. So let's actually do that for subtract, multiply, and divide. These subtract, multiply, and divide, right? So we have add, and we have subtract, and then we have let's see, multiply, and we have say divide. So here we're going to have divide button, and then we're going to have divide btn, and here we're going to change this to the division, right? The division, and then this we're going to change it to okay, this sum, let's just call it result, right? So that we wouldn't, and then here will now become results, right? So when we change that becomes the result. Here would say result, then we change here to result, right? And then here we put the multiply because it's multiplication, right? That's how we do that. And then we put multiply because that's the element on the page, multiply btn. We should have subtract, and then we put subtract here, we put the minus sign, and then we put here result. Then we're going to have here result, and then that's for subtract, right? And then we're going to change here to subtract, and let's just say subtract button, subtract button, and then here we have multiply button, yeah, and then we have all of that, right? Subtract. So let's actually go back and look at this. So by the time we hit refresh and we put 1 and we put 2, we have add, we have subtract, we have multiply, and we have divide. So basically this is a simple JavaScript application calculator, and then we touched a lot of concepts in JavaScript, especially fundamental concepts. So that's how you can actually play around with JavaScript to understand JavaScript better. So thank you for your time, and We hope you learned a lot from this video.